This is a wonderful opportunity to have a chance to hear from Martin Rutte and to just get to know you better, and as a member of the Conscious Leadership Guild. As you probably know, these interviews are intended for the guild members.
Yep.
Will be on a private site. You don't know if they'll become public because we just never know with the way the internet works. But just love the opportunity to get to know you better and to launch into really our first question, if that's okay.
Good, go ahead.
Yeah. So, in the guild, we've had lots of conversation about not the necessity to have a spiritual life and be a guild member, but most people talk naturally about that. It's just a common conversation. So I wanted to just start with asking you about a story about how spiritual wisdom has somehow touched or supported you in your life and in the work you're in. If you could share about some of that.
Yeah, so I looked at these questions beforehand. I made some notes. The questions are fabulous, by the way. So two stories. One is how a management consultant. I've worked with many large companies. I've spoken at Harvard Business School several times. Co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul at Work, which was a New York Times business bestseller. So a very traditional consulting background. In the late 80s, I came back from a trip to Hong Kong with my wife where I was speaking, and I went into this funk, and I had no idea why. I looked at my life, I looked at my wife, loved her, loved the marriage. Looked at my work, loved what I was doing. But something was out. The analogy I use is like tongue and groove when the two pieces of wood just went, and I had no idea what this was about because there was nothing external that was going on. So I ended up at a Augustinian monastery, as a Jewish boy, at an Augustinian monastery north of Toronto called Mary Lake. And I had a very, very profound experience. And the language I heard in my mind was, it's about God. And William, the two pieces of wood just went click. And that I just knew that was the next phase of my life. And I went back to Toronto, started talking to people about it. No, you can't talk about it. You can't talk about it. I went to LA and talked to people there, all of whom said, yes, you can talk about it. And that just opened the door because I saw that there was a longing for the spiritual in me, first of all, and in the workplace. But how do you bring that in? And then because people said, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about this. And I said, when I came back to Toronto, well, why? I'm not, first of all, I don't have a definition of spirituality in work. It really is an inquiry for me. Right. And secondly, I'm not making any request of you. Why can't I talk about it? Right. No. People will think you're proselytizing. You're trying to shove this hidden agenda, none of which was true. And that's when the second penny dropped. And I realized that the fear that they had was about my proselytizing, which I had no intention of doing. And that the basis of proselytizing was, I'm right, you're wrong, as I have the answer and you don't.
Right.
And I said, what if we looked at spirituality as a question, as an ongoing inquiry? And that opened that whole field for me. What is heaven? What is spirituality in the workplace for you? And tons of different answers. And people would say, well, what is it for you? No, I'm not going to answer that. I want you to answer it. And so ethics, love. One woman I remember said, better drinks in the soft drink dispenser at work. And I said afterwards, what does that have to do with anything? And she said, well, if your body's not healthy, you don't have a place for your spirit. And so she taught me a great lesson, which was, you don't know. So that was that's spirituality. And then 20 years so after that, I had another epiphany. And I said, if every business in the world is spiritual, is that what you want? And then again, this thought popped into my mind. No, what you're talking about is heaven on earth. And that's been the latest inquiry, which is, how do we have heaven on earth show up as a possibility and as an engagement for people? And make that real. And so have a book, Project Heaven on Earth. And we have people all over the world engaged in their own project by their definition of heaven on earth, again, not mine, and making that real. So those were two major spiritual inbreakings, as a friend calls it. And I knew when each one came that that's the next phase of my life.
Wow, wow. And really you had a way of sensing it, hearing it, knowing it, just out of the inquiry you were making. What is this next thing?
No, I wasn't. Well, yes, in the case of Mary, like, yes, it was. And I
Yeah.
had no idea. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
That's right.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, as you take that kind of experience that you've had, what is it in terms of wisdom or experience you feel that you can offer to this dialogue that we have around conscious leadership? What is it? What's your kind of what you're bringing to the guild about all that?
Well, I think my experience in spirituality and work, my experience in heaven on earth, my experience with chicken soup in terms of a narrative, what is the story? Because in essence, I think what the guild is doing is saying part of the new story is conscious leadership. We're putting that out very clearly and unapologetically. And so what are some of the, for me, some of the aspects of that I looked at was that I think you have a dream, that each of us has a dream, our soul, deeper than a dream. We have a soul's longing, a soul's hunger, a divine essence longing. And I think individually and collectively in the world, now is the time for that to come forth. So, and to do it with excellence, with enjoyment, to be curious. Curiosity is a very important value, I believe. To do it with play, with fun. Play is a high value for me. To listen to what the soul wants rather than the fear of non-agreement. So, for example, when I started talking about that, nobody was talking about spirituality and work. I was talking about heaven on earth. Only people, religious, proselytizing people, but not in the way that I meant it. But I knew enough to say to those people who thought I was nuts, okay, first of all, I listened to them. And then I said, what's my truth? And I'm going to follow that as long as it does no harm to me or others. So I think, I think one other one is, a friend of mine said years ago, don't hold your beliefs in a tight fist, but hold them in an open palm so that you can test them and so they can be more fluid and flexible. So I think my playfulness, my curiosity, my engagement with life, that's what I bring to.
I can really hear that you hold this lightly. You're not there to save the world. You're there to offer something to the world. And that you're there to listen to their experiences more than just trying to impose your experience. And I really feel that from what you're saying.
Thank you, William. Yeah, that's very important to me. Both in spirituality and working now in heaven on earth. For those people who say, no, I'm not interested. Fine, thank you. End of the story. Unless you want to play with me later, but end of the story.
Right. And now with all of that, we have an expression like what's learning you, not what are you learning, but what's maybe learning you in some way. It's a learning edge. It's where you're exploring, I know that I don't know. What's kind of on your own frontier of learning? It may be something that's being compelled from the inside in some way.
Yes, and from culture generally. I would say I'm exploring more of we. I think I has gone too far in the world, and that it's time for we, because the major problems in the world, the pandemics, the environment, nuclear weapons, those are we solutions, and we needs to come into maturity now. So I would say that. I would say how to scale my work organically with heaven on earth globally. That is going on, but to bring it to a new level of appreciation in the world.
And is there something in there about yourself that's also kind of growing up in some new way? Your own interior evolution here.
Yes, I've just finished a course with a woman named Isabel Tierney, who's just brilliant. And she talks
Mhm.
about a red zone and green zone, which at first thought is so simple. I mean, I got it in 5 seconds. It was a 12-week course. It went
Uh-huh.
so into depth in that. And I really saw where I get plugged in. And so
Uh-huh.
that allowed me to see it very clearly and move away from it, not be so obsessed with it.
Mhm.
Where else am I learning? I'm reading a new book called Money, Come Dance with Me, and it's the best thing I've read on money. She's saying that Gail West, that money is a divine aspect,
Uh,
and she's having me do exercises in the book, cleaning up my parents' relationship with money, my childhood relationship with money. It's a place that I've never been hyper interested in, but the way she goes at it, i.e. through the divine, through the spiritual, it's fascinating to me. She's
mhm.
combining the spiritual, deep spiritual world and the
Right.
money world. So that's a very growing edge for me.
Wow. I can hear in that. I mean, that's an edge that some people are very suspicious about because of the history. And yet it's another area where you're taking on those places that the world often holds apart. You know,
Yes.
spirituality and business, for example, spirituality and money. That there's a
Yep.
lot of suspicion of those conversations, and I really hear how you've kind of successfully jumped into those conversations within your own self.
Very
So
important. Yeah, very
yeah.
important. Um, I think as more of our divine essence comes out, to say that and money are two separate domains, which I kind of thought is not accurate. I mean, that's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, yeah. You know, a little side here. Um, I've done some reading of Adam Smith. You know, who's considered to be the great grandfather of capitalism,
Yeah,
and he was also a moral philosopher, as I imagine you know. That
I do know,
he,
and that's very important. Let's not skip over that. That's very important.
Mhm. And that what he said was that even within the economics, that our moral faculties have to be the arbiters of our behavior and our thoughts and how we work with other people. And in essence said, if we pushed aside our moral faculties and just try to do what's in our personal economic zone, we'll miss the point completely. We'll actually at that point have an unhealthy system. And I think we've proved his point.
To a growing extent, we've proved that point. Yeah. And so the reason I stopped you and said I want to underline that is because
Yeah.
for me, the notion of morality and ethics being swept out of culture is very worrisome. And so
Yeah.
I always like to highlight that when people bring that up.
Yep. Good. Good. Now, as you look forward in time, even though it's all present moment,
Yes.
as you stretch this present moment in time, um, what do you long for, or what do you have a vision or an aspiration for, or a seeing about? Um, as you look at life, even perhaps beyond your lifetime, do you have some kind of aspiration there or vision?
Yeah. Um, William, when I looked at the three major parts of my life, vision, we didn't talk a lot of that, but I spent a lot of time on vision, a lot of time on spirituality and work, and now a lot of time on heaven on earth.
Yeah.
The underlying source of all of that is my own pain when I see unnecessary suffering in the world. For example, the recent Palestinian, Israeli conflict. It makes me
Mhm.
nuts, because it's the unnecessary and immoral suffering in the world that drives me crazy. And so that's always been, and it's becoming clear to me, that's the reason for my work. And so in a larger scale, we talked earlier about spirituality and heaven on earth. 10 or 15 years ago, we heard people say, we need a new story. We need a new story. The current story is not working. It's not working. It's not working. But nobody named that new story. And so if you don't name the new story and only complain that it's not present, people drop it. And so my invitation, my offering is to say the new story of what it means to be a human and what it means to be humanity is heaven on earth. And once people get by the notion that I'm not trying to proselytize, I'm not trying to impose, but rather evoke the heaven on earth that I know is already there. I've developed 3 questions that do that easily. And they get it, if they organically get it and start running with it, the kinds of things that people are doing around the world are so inspiring to me that they're staggering.
Yeah.
A newspaper in India, Derrida in India, on the front page above on the masthead every week, Derrida, a heaven on earth city. That's incredible. A woman in Portugal did a website for the 260 million Portuguese speakers in the world about heaven on earth. So these incredible ideas that come forward from people's desire to have the story of humanity be, this is heaven on earth. Because at heart, if you had a magic wand, would you want the craziness that's going on? No. Well, I think at this point in the evolution of humanity, we are now saying, okay, let's go for the ultimate. Let's go for heaven on earth. And it's not as crazy. It's an idea whose time has come. And it's more than a good idea. People are actually doing this globally.
It sounds like you've tapped into something that is, again, part of our human essence, and a human aspiration.
Yep.
That is already cross humanity, cross cultural, whatever you want to call it. And you really tapped into that kind of root longing and a root possibility that people can start seeing. So wonderful.
Thank you, William. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. Now, as a member of the Guild, what kind of support to you are you inviting from Guild members? Do you have an ask, as some people might say, or something that you're here for as part of that kind of flow of energy and exchange?
It's a wonderful, wonderful question when I first read it, and now hearing it again from you. My modus operandi has been to give, and this question is, yes, you can give for sure, and we'd also like you to receive. And so I would like those, if you're watching this, or as you're watching this now, you can go on my website, Project Heaven on Earth. You can see the 3 Heaven on Earth questions that get you in touch with what heaven on earth is for you and how you can simply begin making that real in the world. You can go on Amazon and buy, I want to ask you to buy 3 copies of my book, one for you, one for somebody in your life right now that you know, and one for somebody who's going to come into your life, called Project Heaven on Earth. And the other thing I'd like to offer is, if you want to speak to me about heaven on earth, I don't want to sell you anything. If this resonates with you in some way, I'm happy, because you're a Guild member, to do a 20-minute consult with you to clarify what this is for you. That would be a delight for me. That would support me as well.
I can also imagine, just want to pose this, that as you're looking, what's learning you, for example, is how to scale your work. That if people in the Guild have ways of supporting you in understanding that, ways to scale, or in the actual scaling effort itself, that would be a support for you also, I imagine.
Huge. It would, huge, yes.
And so I really appreciate your givingness too. And the giving and receiving are kind of all mixed together here into one flow. Now, the last thing that we have for this interview is an open-ended kind of a question where we had 4 different questions that you could choose from and say, hey, this is one thing I'd still also like to talk about. And did you have a chance to look those over? Did you have one?
I thought you were going to pick it.
Well, I can pick it. I can, but I was going to ask you.
Pick it.
Okay. Let's see. I guess, what is one thing that maybe even outside the domain of your work that would help us to know you more deeply or better? Just something that you could share with us. And I say outside the domain of your work because I know how much the work is part of your whole life. I'm wondering, therefore, if there's another part of your life that may not become as visible and easily visible to other people?
There's two. One is I do a form of art called monotype, which is a one-of-a-kind printing process. And I've been doing it 15 or 20 years. It's a very simple process, but it has layers and layers and layers of complexity that you can add. I'm still learning. And I love, can we put an attachment of a website on this? Because I made a little video on how I make a monotype.
I think so. I'll talk to Sam
Okay.
about that.
I'll send you, yeah. What I love about that is I can barely breathe when I go into that print shop. I'm so excited, literally, because in monotype, you bring yourself to the painting of the print on a piece of plexiglass. You put that on a bed and on a steel bed and on a piece of paper, and it rolls through a press and gets squashed together, and you get the print. I never know what's going to come out. And that's the spiritual magic for me.
Mhm.
And actually, if you've ever been in a print shop when the monotype's done and it comes out, you don't have to ask anyone to do this, but everyone instinctively goes completely quiet, turns and watches as that print is unveiled. It's like the birth of a baby. It has
Wow.
never existed before, and another one similar will never exist. And that's
Got it.
I love being in that room. The other thing, quickly, I'm Jewish. There's a thing in Judaism called the Talmud, which is like 40 something volumes. And this
Yes.
rabbi had this idea, about 100 years ago. What if every Jew in the world studied the same page of the Talmud on the same day? And I found out about that about a year or so ago, when the cycle, to do that, it takes 7.5 years roughly to do it. And that was so outrageous, like becoming a Jesuit priest. It was so outrageous. And I thought, I'm going to do this. And so I've been doing it for over a year now. And it's
Wow.
fascinating.
Wow. And you're linked into a whole consciousness at that same moment.
Of people who are doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Martin. It's again, it's delicious just listening to you. And I can feel my getting to know you in some ways that will spark more and more conversations, I'm sure, between the two of us. And that's exactly what these interviews are for. So
thank you, William. I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.